I'm Mary Husson-Callan, president of the local League of Women Voters here in Rochester. The League, as many of you know, is...
I hear you very well.
How about now?
Yes.
Okay. The League, as you know, is a nonpartisan political organization which encourages the informed and active participation of citizens in their government. We influence public policy through education and advocacy, and we focus significant effort on registering new voters and encouraging them to get out and vote. If you're not registered to vote, we'd be happy to talk to you at one of the tables here. By the way, the League of Women Voters is not limited to women. Men are most welcome to join us in making democracy work. On behalf of all of the members of the Rochester League, I'd like to welcome you to this forum, exploring experiences in our country's history as an argument for voting. Sisters Ann Urquhart, Sister Josepha, and Sister Barbara Lum are members of the Sisters of St. Joseph here in Rochester. You may also know that when they served at the SSJ mission in Selma, Alabama, they helped save the life of U.S. Representative John Lewis, among many others, who were brutally beaten on Bloody Sunday at the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma in 1965. Reverend Marvin McMickle is president and a professor at Colgate, Rochester, Crozer Divinity School, also in Rochester. He's also director of the program of Black Church Studies. He spoke at our forum on the Shelby County Supreme Court decision, which gutted the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and he'll be familiar to many who read the editorial pages of the Democrat Chronicle. We're proud to present this important discussion, and we're especially pleased to be able to offer a question and answer segment following the presentations. We request, of course, that all of our guests respect our panel, our hosts here at Asbury First United Methodist Church, and the League's own commitment to civil and respectful discourse. Please join me in welcoming Sister Ann Urquhart, Sister Josepha, Sister Barbara Lum, and Reverend McMickle.
Good evening, everyone. It's a privilege to be here this evening, and thank you for inviting us. And it's a privilege to be here with Dr. McMickle and to be able to hear his presentation on this most important topic, history as an argument for voting. The topic is inexhaustible. The Sisters of St. Joseph have a long history in the city of Selma, and Mary mentioned that's where we served. We started our mission there in 1940 in response to a call to work in the southern states, particularly among the African American community. We soon opened a school for black children. We renovated and opened a nursing home. We visited people in their homes to determine the needs of the community. And in the early 40s, the sisters were invited to staff Good Samaritan Hospital, founded by the Fathers of St. Edmund, to serve the black community of Selma. Eventually, we opened a school of practical nursing, the first of its kind, for African Americans in the state of Alabama. The city of Selma, population 21,000, sits on the banks of the Alabama River. And because of its location, it became a valuable port before and during the Civil War. Selma was a manufacturing hub for armaments and weapons for the Confederate Army, and in 1864, General Edmund Pettus led the troops in the Battle of Selma. They lost the battle, but every year they reenact the Battle of Selma, and I don't think they've won it yet. They're trying. Edmund Pettus Bridge, I think there's supposed to be a photo of that.
It's at the end, I didn't put it at the beginning.
We're doing the video clip.
Can we do the video clip, or I can get to it?
No. There it is, the famous the infamous Edmund Pettus Bridge, named in honor of General Pettus, Edmund Pettus, is itself an architectural feat. And our sister city's bridge here in Rochester, I think, is a similar structure. The Bridge to Freedom, as it is sometimes called, is the place where people suffered and sacrificed, and where history was made in 1965. The Sisters of St. Joseph are deeply entwined with the history of the voting rights movement and the events of March 7, 1965, known as Bloody Sunday. And Sister Josepha and Sister Barbara Lum, who both were working in Selma in 1965, will share their stories.
Thank you very much. Is this on? Thank you. Doesn't sound like it's on.
Harry, you know what Marvin is?
Let's see what kind of magic we can do.
All right, because I need volume. All right, something I was going to say about that bridge or that day that slipped my mind while we were doing this. So I'll begin where I was going to begin, which is a few weeks before Bloody Sunday, a young man from Marion, Alabama, who was well known to the civil rights community in Selma, was killed by state troopers in a night march for civil rights. And before he died, however, he was brought to Good Samaritan Hospital, where we did care for him. And every day that I went in to see Jimmy Lee Jackson, he would take my hand and say, "Sister, don't you think this is a high price to pay for freedom?" So I think of him every time I vote. Moving forward to Bloody Sunday, he was the catalyst. His death was the catalyst for the decision to march on Bloody Sunday. And that march was led by Hosea Williams and by now Congressman John Lewis, both young men in their early 20s. And before they marched, some other people came to the hospital to ask if I would fix a first aid kit for them. And so unsuspecting was I, which I shouldn't have been, but that I just fixed a little simple first aid kit and kind of said, go, hope it all goes well. And a couple hours later, people began coming back to our emergency room, and in all, we had about 100 people that we treated in our emergency room. And I'm not sure if there were others that got triaged past emergency and were in our dining room, in the halls, because I was in the emergency room the whole time. So John Lewis was admitted to the hospital unconscious and has ever since said, "The Sisters of St. Joseph of Rochester saved my life." And I think that goes way back to the 1940 sisters ever saying yes to, "We will come and open that mission." So we treated people, and the doctor that I was working with, there were 3 stretchers, 3 bays with stretchers in the emergency room. And the doctor I was working with was a white doctor, and he kept saying, I know you wouldn't have done this to whoever was on the table at the time. I know you would never have done this. It was outside agitators that kind of put you up to this. And as if life was so wonderful for people of color in the South that who would ever have thought of protesting. Voting rights were very hard to come by. There was all kinds of resistance to allowing people to vote. And I won't go into all of that, but there were just as many barriers as you could think of, including essays on all kinds of obscure topics. After Bloody Sunday came the voting rights. Voting rights was passed, Lyndon B. Johnson using the words of the Civil Rights Anthem, "We shall overcome," when he signed the Voting Rights Act. And people that I knew in Selma dressed up for the occasion. They dressed to go to the voting booth and or the polling places. There were tables. But it was just very impressive and very moving. And I remember one young man who worked at our hospital at Good Samaritan brought his son with him to see him vote, and then came back to Good Samaritan to tell me, I just wanted you to know that I voted, and this is my son, and I wanted him to see this. There was one other thing that I really wanted to say, and I can't think of it, so it's enough.
We're gonna do the video now.
When I would go in to visit him, each day he would take my hand and say, "Sister, don't you think this is a high price to pay for freedom?"
Sister Barbara Long says every time she tells the story of her friend Jimmy Lee Jackson, it takes her back to February 18th, 1965. Jackson was beaten and shot by state troopers while participating in a peaceful voting march. He was then transported to the Good Samaritan Hospital in Selma, Alabama, the same hospital that was run and operated by the Sisters of St. Joseph of Rochester, New York. This was the only facility in 9 counties that would serve Black people. Jackson died 8 days later, and this was the start of the Selma to Montgomery March.
When I was in high school and in grade school, the Sisters of St. Joseph had talked about the Selma missions, but I had no idea what it was going to be like.
In Selma, the White Citizens Council, also known as a white segregationist group, controlled the city, like the mayor and judges. This group used scare tactics to keep Blacks from voting. Sister Barbara would write about the doubt she would hear from Blacks in Selma.
It will never come to Selma. Selma is way too tightly controlled for it to ever come to Selma.
That is until days later when she was approached by a teacher and a reverend asking for a favor.
There's a group going to march this afternoon, and would you fix a first aid kit? Oh, sure. I never imagined, nor did they, what was going to happen to them.
At the foot of Edmund Pettus Bridge, 600 peaceful marchers were met by state and local police. They were chased down by horses, beaten with billy clubs, and sprayed with tear gas. Soon, Good Samaritan Hospital was flooded with victims.
People were saturated with tear gas, and we had a small 3-bed emergency room, and so all of us were saturated with tear gas. And people just leaped in and did what we knew how to do.
Bloody Sunday, that horrific day. Sister Barbara saw over 100 patients, one of which would become a U.S. representative for Georgia's 5th Congressional District.
John Lewis, who was one of the leaders of the march, was severely beaten and had a concussion.
Last October, Congressman Lewis paid the Sisters of St. Joseph a visit and expressed his gratitude for their compassion 50 years ago.
I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. You blessed us. You saved us.
are marching today from Selma to Montgomery.
The march from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama was inspiration for future marches in the civil rights movement led by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
And I think this is a demonstration of progress that is definitely being made.
I think that high price for freedom isn't finished yet.
The courage of ordinary people to fight for equality continues years later. In Rochester, Waukesha Bailey.
Almost got me. Thank you. I have 85 pages here. I intend to read every one. I want to thank you, first of all, for allowing me to come in to the church tonight. Because for years, another sister and I, when we were very young, a couple years ago, had back trouble, and we were assigned a doctor down here in the Alexander Street area. And every time we came to this church, we took the bus. Every time we came past this church, this is what I would hear. Every time we came back to this church, see that church? My father built that church. And on we go. We come home. My father built that church. And I tell you, I think I went to 600 doctor's appointments with it because I was so bored by it and so getting very good. Not I, but I felt something was going on. I thought to myself, I am not going to ask her how her father built that church. I still do not know. I actually looked for her yesterday in the dining room and I couldn't find her. I was really angry. And I couldn't find out how her father built that church. My name is Sister Josepha. I'm a Toomey girl from Auburn, New York, TWOMEY. I was assigned to Alabama 1 year after I spent a year living with Sister Frances Marie, who was this big and who started the mission in Selma, Alabama. And if that wasn't one of the greatest privileges of my life, she was a hellion. She loved Selma, and she told all her stories about Selma. She had glass slides. She had a Kodak slide machine. I never saw glass slides until that. She would set everything up on the superior's desk. We would hear this when the superior wasn't home. And we were using it for a half-hour meditation. Anyway, she would go through things like, Sister Ann just talked about starting this. She said, this is the way she would start it. Mother Rose Miriam called and said, Sister, I want you to start a clinic. So we did. The next year, Mother called us and said, Sister, we want you to start a school, 1 grade at a time, till you get to 8 grades. And we did. Mother Rose Miriam called the next year and told us to start a nursing home. And we did. It went on ever. And we were hysterical. I said to her at one point, Sister Frances Marie, you make it sound as if Mother said, would you like to cross the street, sister? And she said, we did. We did. Anyway, I was assigned to teach the 5th and 6th grade at St. Elizabeth's School in Selma. And as you saw with Sister Barbara, it's very difficult sometimes to 50 years later, talk about what happened on Bloody Sunday. It was quite an experience. The school teacher's Barb called, she was on duty that day, she called and said, we need all this hospital sisters over. And then she called back and said, we need the school teachers too. So we were all someplace in the hospital. I had the job of going from Central Supply was my job. I didn't know where Central Supply was. I didn't know what Central Supply was, but I found it quickly. People in the dining room, as she said, reeking with gas orders. It was just so very sad, so very sad. I'm going to tell you, though, about one of the young men who visited my classroom. One of the 5th grade girls came up very early on in the school year, and she stood in front of my desk and said, "Sister, could we bring Jonathan and do something with him for show and tell?" And a boy's voice from Ray Heiner, who was in 6th grade, said very quietly to her, "Linda, we don't have show and tell in our classroom." She turned around, it was her older brother. She turned around and she said, "Shut up, girl." She said very quietly. She wanted us, and I said, "We better talk about it and find out who Jonathan is." Jonathan was a young man from the Boston area. He was from New Hampshire. He was an Episcopalian school graduate, and he was in Bible school. He was in school to become an Episcopalian minister. He saw things, he heard things, he read things about Selma and what was happening. He went back to New Hampshire and talked to his family and packed up everything and moved to Selma. When he got off the plane, strange thing, Mr. and Mrs. West were there from Selma. Montgomery is 50 miles from Selma. You land in Montgomery and ride in through Selma on a car. And it's very scary knowing that Lowndes County is there where so much happened. Very scary it was. They have widened the road significantly in the last many years. We went back for 50 years. But Jonathan came. Jonathan got into all kinds of things, voter registration, teaching people how to register, what they need to know, getting them to a registered office, did all kinds of things. Anything that needed to be done, Jonathan did and was willing to do it. Very lovely man. He explained that when he came in for show and tell, and we did let him show and tell. Very nice. He appeared in his black outfit with his white collar. We also had a lady in Selma, staying in Selma, Viola Liuzzo from Detroit. She was married, had 5 growing children, and as happened with Jonathan, she got the idea that too she could be doing something in Selma, down in the South, that would be of help to get people to vote, to get people to do what normal Americans hopefully do. And so she had her discussion with her family, and also just got in her car and drove to Selma. And one of the things that you find out about Mrs. Liuzzo was her car was what she used most of the time. She did everything. She drove people wherever they needed to go for whatever they had to do. And of course the voter registration was so important, so impossible. The reason I tell you about those 2 people is because both of them were shot and killed. Jonathan was probably, he wasn't 30 yet, he was probably, I think, 26. He was killed by a man. He went to a store out in Lowndes County, and he was just looking for something to eat. He hadn't eaten as he worked through the day. He was looking for crackers, something to eat, something to drink. He needed water. He shot him with a 12-gauge shotgun, and he was dead. Mrs. Liuzzo, using her car for as long as she was there, she got quite sick one day because she was just so overtired, so she stayed away from work. She was back and forth from Montgomery to Selma, often, always on the road in her car. And when she was not feeling well, she went home and took a nap. But she left her car, which I think just says what kind of a woman. She wouldn't go home unless she left the car because somebody might have to go to the clinic or to the hospital or a doctor or whatever. There might be something that they need from a grocery store, from whatever store. So she left her car. And a couple of days later, she realized that she was feeling a little bit better. She thought she could go back to work. And when she got back to work, someone told her that it was a good thing she was back because her car was being driven by a young man who did not have a license. And he was waiting to get home out to Selma. And so she said she would take him. And one of the things I read was she spoke gently to the mountain boy and did not scold him, just explained that he shouldn't be driving a car because he wasn't old enough. Which, the gently thing really got me because I'd probably be furious with the young man, but she was gentle to him. Wonderful, wonderful. The same, I put them together because there were two other people besides Divinity. There was also Reverend Reed. Reverend Reed got off the plane from Boston. He was a Unitarian minister. He got off the plane in Montgomery with two friends, and he was dead the very next day. They went to a restaurant. I told you. They went to a restaurant in, I think it was in Montgomery. They were given directions to the restaurant, but unfortunately, they're little places. They're small little places down there. And they wanted Southern food. They didn't want American food. They wanted Southern food. So they were given directions, but on the way to where they were going, they passed a restaurant that was used by many people from the KKK. And that was the mistake. When they came out of the restaurant, Reverend Reed wanted to call his wife and just to tell her they were there and how things were going. So the other two men walked away, the other two ministers walked away, and a woman turned to see him being clubbed in the side of the head and dying the next day. He had to be taken to Birmingham because we didn't have a neurosurgeon who could handle the particular problem that he had. He died the very next day, very next afternoon. And I put the other two together. I put Jonathan and Mrs. Buzo together because when I was putting this talk together, I found, and of course in this 85 pages, I can't find the one I want. This is what I found about the trial for the man who killed Jonathan Daniels. Out of the book, this is what I found about his trial. Jonathan had died August 20th. This is the courtroom. There was a jury of 12 white men. One of the jury members was the Grand Dragon of the Alabama KKK. In the audience was the infinite wizard of the KKK. It took 96 minutes to come up with a verdict of acquittal on all charges. The judge had refused to charge murder. He charged manslaughter. Those of us who worked in prison know the difference. Much, much difference between one and the other. What the worst thing I found was 3 of the men in the jury were 3 men who had already been tried for Mrs. Liuzzo's murder. There were 3 KKK men. They were waiting for a retrial on her case, and they were sitting on Jonathan's case. That information is just to give you what the court system. And you know, one of the things, I'll say it quietly, the new Attorney General of the United States was a Selma boy originally. And also, he was their Attorney General in Alabama. And now we have him for ours. He wasn't on this, he was not the judge here, but I just passed it on. And that's why I put them together, because I found that last item about the jury, and it just drives me crazy. I can't believe it. Thank you.
While we're waiting for the sister to find a better spot, I know there's Sisters of St. Joseph in the crowd. May I ask you please to stand up? The rest of the sisters for the order. Maybe afterwards we can kind of gather and get a group picture. Please and thank you. Okay. McMickle.
All right, tough act to follow.
The sisters taught me, and there was another sister who I'm still in contact with, who was our yearbook editor, and I see her several times a year. It's Sister Margaret Brennan, all right, Peggy Brennan, and she always said, you can't be a nun, a small child, or a dog, or a creature, you know, they are just magnets for attention, and being drawn to them in terms of being in public. But these sisters, they were spectacular, you see, and they continue to be spectacular, and I need to like it. So.
Well, thank you all, both for what you did in 1965 and what you continue to do. So grateful to all of you for your work. So what I've been asked to do is to give a little historical context to African American voting rights using Bloody Sunday and the march from Selma to Montgomery as a point of reference, but only as a point of reference. So what events occurred prior to and after the passage of the 1965 Voting Rights Act that was made possible, the act, largely by the people and events involved in the Selma to Montgomery, Alabama march. Between March the 7th, the first attempt to cross the Edmund Pettus Bridge, which was, as you just heard, the date for Bloody Sunday. There were then other days when there were attempts to cross